Hey guys, what's up? It is Public, back with another video, and guys, I am very excited to be making this video. We have gotten substantial changes to Shadow Priest inside of Shadowlands. It's actually bigger than I think any of us really thought were actually going to happen, but we have some very sweeping changes. So what I'm going to do in this video, I don't have access to play any of the new changes, right? They'll be in beta probably tomorrow, but I just kind of want to go over all of the changes, give my initial reaction to what I think they feel like, how cool I think they are, and kind of what these are baseline. If you haven't seen them yet, I will link the blue post down in the description so you can check it out. It is a little kind of hard to read, so I'll try and kind of iterate, like clarify points that they're trying to make, because I'm kind of reading into it a little bit. But without further ado, let's get started. Alright guys, so starting off, I'm just basically just going to kind of read through these changes below. Again, you can follow in the description below if you want to kind of see these. But starting off, Voidform is totally different now, right? They've basically rethought and given a lot of feedback to what we've said. Voidform is now a cooldown, right? So it's not a minute and a half cooldown baseline. It's no longer something that you press periodically throughout the rotation. Still kind of unsure where this fits, like with Void Eruption and Void Bolt. We'll find out soon. But so basically, the old style of gameplay is now gone. Voidform is now a cooldown. We are now a cooldown spec. Voidform still increases our damage done. Right now, it's a flat 20% for 15 seconds, right? So that's the main, play of Voidform is you're going in there to do a lot of damage. Now, while you're in Voidform, it did used to reduce the cooldown of Mind Blast. What they've done instead, which is interesting, is that they've removed that cooldown reduction, but they've also made it give you 2 charges of Mind Blast baseline, right? So they've actually removed Shadow Word Void as a talent and said, okay, you get 1 charge of Mind Blast out of Voidform, and then inside of Voidform you get 2 baseline, right? I'll go over some more things in a second, because I think this is actually a very positive change. There is no longer a cooldown reduction, like I said, but when you enter Voidform, they do reset the cooldown. So we'll see what that looks like. And then the other big important change is Voidform no longer gives us stacking haste. There's no longer this, I'm like ramping up to do a lot of damage. It's, oh, I'm in Voidform now, right? I have my damage. There's no like ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? I don't have to wait 30 seconds. I don't have to wait for Voidform to end. None of that stuff, right? So Voidform is now a cooldown. This is the biggest change that we have. Pretty awesome. Okay. Next up, again, don't have a lot of info on what this means or how this works, but like when we're not in void form, how do things work, right? Like, is it still the insanity system? How does that function? Are we basically just there? And I think their answer here is Devouring Plague, right? So when we're not inside of void form, our main play is, well, you're keeping up your dots, you're keeping up Devouring Plague, you're using your insanity on Devouring Plague. I think that's the idea, but we'll see. So they've actually changed Devouring Plague a bit. They did fix a bug where the ticks weren't critting, which is awesome. They actually halved its duration as well, so it's now a 6-second dot that deals, twice as much damage. So it's actually very, very meaty. So we're doing a lot of damage even outside of that void form window because of Devouring Plague. It's just obviously not as much. Okay, so the other big change to this spec is this new passive called Dark Thoughts. So if you're remembering our old talent tree, we had this talent called Shadowy Insight, which kind of procced random Mind Blasts. Well, they've basically turned that into a passive. So Shadowy Insight has been removed. It's no longer a talent. And instead we have this guy called Dark Thoughts. So it's a baseline proc. And what it does is each dot that we have, so we have our 3 dots, right? Shadow Word Pain, Vampiric Touch, Devouring Plague. I'm assuming it counts Plague. I guess we'll see. Gives Mind Flay or Mind Seer a 2% chance per dot to add a charge of Mind Blast. So effectively what this means is while we're sitting there just channeling our Flays or Seers, we're passively getting procs that let us do an instant cast Mind Blast. And the great part about this is this works very similarly to Fire Mages with, I forget the exact spell, I think it's Fire Blast, where they can actually cast that while they're casting something. So while we're channeling Mind Flay and Mind Seer, we can actually toss out instant cast Mind Blast without interrupting that channel. And the cool part with this is it actually stacks up to 5 times. So we have 5 charges of instant cast Mind Blast that we get to kind of store up and use in the middle of Flay. So I'm super excited to see how this plays. It reads pretty intricately, so we'll see what this means. Obviously I want to get there and testing as soon as possible, but I mean, face of it, it's pretty exciting. Okay, some other baseline changes before we get into the talent changes. So Void Eruption's cast time has been reduced by 40% baseline, right? So Void Eruption is still a thing. I'm assuming it's there as like that's our Void Form cooldown button. So getting into Void Form isn't the normal long cast time. This is actually just the baseline component from Legacy of the Void, the old talent, now baked into the spec, which is great to see. Another amazing change, we've been talking about this forever, the Mind Blast cooldown problem. They, for some reason, desynced the cooldown by a half second going into Shadowlands. They've now fixed that, which is great. So Even though we're not playing with 2 charges of Shadow Word Void now, or Mind Blast, sorry, baseline, outside of Voidform, this still should fix the issues with syncing up that as one of our spells, so which is great to see. Also, another quick change, Shadow Word Death no longer generates Insanity. It still will generate Insanity, assuming with that Death and Madness talent, which we'll get to in a second, but baseline it does not generate any Insanity, which just matches the tooltip. I don't know how this will change exactly. There are some rumors about changes to the damage component of the spell, but because it no longer generates Insanity, we're not going to be as, interested in casting it above 20% on mob's health. But we'll see what happens. It might just still do enough damage to warrant that. We'll see. Okay, and the other large change to the baseline spec is with our Shadowy Apparitions. So if you're not quite aware, we have this baseline proc in the game of the spirits that fly towards targets. There's been a talent in the game for a while that increases the damage they do or give them Insanity. They've changed it several times. They've actually reworked this completely. So now our Mind Blast, Devouring Plagues, and Void Bolts instantly spawn Shadowy Apparitions, right? It doesn't look like there's a chance on this at all. So it's every time that you cast these spells, right? Which is huge. Now, granted, you're not casting these that often, especially because you only have 1 charge of these abilities, but with all these Devouring Plagues we can get out, you'll get a lot. And it seemingly procs once per target that has Vampiric Touch active, right? So it's no longer chained to Shadow Word Pain like it was before. It's now Vampiric Touch. And then importantly, if your Vampiric Touch crits on a target, you also spawn 2 Shadowy Apparitions towards that target. So it's very much reworked spirits. It's interesting that it's now on Vampiric Touch instead of Shadow Word Pain. Not quite sure why they did that. Maybe it's to change how we spread dots or whatever, but that's the last baseline change that we have, okay? So, I mean, on the surface of it, after looking at all these baseline changes, I'm actually really excited to play this. I think it's going to be great. I think it obviously solves the ramp problem with Shadow, which, we're interested to see how that is. And I think giving us a cooldown it's going to be really satisfying to play, I think, especially with the new baseline passive that we have. And, frankly, just with these changes alone, we look like a Mythic Plus monster and Dungeon monster. So we'll see what happens, guys. But, to really get the full picture, the talents really help us out here. So let's move on to talents. All right, guys. So while I'm talking about talents in this next section, I'm going to put up a graphic of what we believe the talent tree to be just going off of these changes. We've seen lots of different things being leaked out throughout the community and forums and stuff. So this is mostly just an illustration. This might change, but this is pretty accurate. It looks pretty similar to what we got in the post. There are a few errors in the post that look corrected here, but let's walk through it. Okay, so first things first, level 15. I've already kind of mentioned this before, but as far as talents go, we only kept 1 here. So Fortress of the Mind is still staying, not changing at all. They actually moved Death and Madness to this row as kind of that execute option. I guess Fortress is kind of meant to be that single target nuke. And then we get a new talent called Unfurling Darkness. After casting Vampiric Touch on a target, your next Vampiric Touch is instant cast and deals some X amount of damage instantly. Can only occur once every 15 seconds. They did cap it, so it can't be like super crazy with Misery or anything, but very interesting. I'm kind of curious how it plays, but because I'm not sure if this would really, change your damage a whole lot. I guess you would want to kind of maybe stagger how you do these procs based on the pack or whatever, but kind of an interesting change. So that's the level 15 row. It's very interesting. I'm kind of surprised that Fortress of the Mind stayed in its current state. It's still pretty boring, but we'll see how it works out. Hopefully they've also fixed Death and Madness because it's hard to test on beta. It's still not resetting properly when you kill a target, but we'll see. Level 25 row has remained unchanged. Nothing's been changed here. As sad as it is, there's no it's not a movement tier or anything like that. It's still the same problems it has. Moving on to the level 30 row, they've actually removed Dark Void. So Dark Void is gone. I actually think this is a very positive change. I made a previous video and I've made several comments that I don't think Dark Void was necessarily fulfilling a great role next to Misery and Twist of Fate, right? So we have a new option called Searing Nightmare. So Searing Nightmare instantly deals shadow damage to all enemies around the target you cast it on and afflicts them with Shadow Word Pain. So that part's like instant cast Shadow Word Pain spread. But if the enemy already has Shadow Word Pain, Searing Nightmare then deals double damage. And you can only use this while channeling Mind Seer. So this is very kind of like interesting. They've kind of played around with like a Mind Seer proc in addition to having Shadow Word Pain on everything. So we don't have an easy way to spread Shadow Word Pain yet. But this is kind of that talent right there. So if you could theoretically use this, I don't quite know what the cooldown is. And then use it once to apply the dots, use Void Bolt to refresh if you're in Void form, all that good stuff, and then use the second one to do double damage. Unsure, but very interesting. I think it could be a contender for Misery Mythic Plus, but we'll see if you need the burst or you want that consistent damage. Okay, moving on, the level 35 row has been remained unchanged, nothing here. Kind of sad that Mind Bomb doesn't stun anymore, but is what it is. Moving on to the level 40 row here. So because Death and Madness moved up to the level 15 row, we now have a new slot to fill. So they filled it with a new ability called Psychic Link. Again, this is a monster Mythic Plus potential here. So Psychic Link gives you ability Mind Blast deals 60% of its damage to all targets afflicted by your vampiric touch by 40 yards, right? So again, very much playing into the hands of Misery here, where you basically Misery everything, and now your Mind Blast just pumps out AoE to everything. Doesn't even need to be line of sight of everything, we assume. I'm unsure kind of how this works. It's 40-yard range. This looks incredibly strong. If I had to guess, this is probably going to get nerfed to some amount. I mean, unsure. This is kind of taken from an old PvP talent, so they might have just copied that value, but looks super fun to play with. This still is going to be competing with Shadow Crash, which, from an AoE perspective, we'll see. But strangely enough, Auspicious Spirits has still remained unchanged. So with how that works with the Shadowy Apparition baseline change, we'll see how that makes sense or how that works out, but kind of hard to speculate right now. Okay, so moving on to the level 45 row, a few changes here. So they did remove Lingering Insanity. It is gone, right? Which makes sense. Void Form is now 90 seconds, or it's a cooldown, right? So it doesn't really make sense to have Lingering Insanity here anymore, which is awesome. I wasn't really ever a big fan of this, so great. In its place, we have a new talent called Damnation. So instantly afflict the target with Shadow or Pain, Vampiric Touch, and Devouring Plague, free of cost, 1 instant global. And it's got a 45-second cooldown, right? So it's basically like it's kind of like I think there's a Resto Druid talent actually that like puts all your hots on something. PvP talent, I think. So it's basically that, right? We instant cast one ability, you get all 3 of your dots. When you're taking Misery, this saves you 1 global, but if we're on single target, you're on Twisted Fate, this will save you all that, which is great. It's still competing with the same old Mindbender. Mindbender has remained unchanged right now. They did change Void Torrent though, so Void Torrent no longer pauses your insanity while used, so that mechanic in Void Form or whatever is not a thing. But now refreshes the duration of your shadow damage over time effects on the target while it's channeling. So I don't really know if this makes a whole lot of sense, but basically it's going to extend your dots by the duration of the channel. Maybe it's more. I don't know. We don't have the tooltip yet. So unsure of like the value here versus just because it's got the same cooldown as Damnation. So why would you want to refresh as opposed to just casting them all again? So unsure what value we're really getting here as far as the difference. But we'll see. They seem very, very similar, so kind of unsure of that actual goal there. But I guess we're going to mostly use it to extend a Devouring Plague a little bit, but who knows how much value we get. Okay, so moving on to the level 50 row. Again, big changes. Dark Ascension has been removed. This makes sense. It was already kind of not being used and also baked into Surrender to Madness. Speaking of Surrender to Madness, it's now a 90-second cooldown, so they cut that duration off a little bit. Unsure if this will still get used. It's basically triggering a free Void Form for you, so you get your normal Void Form, and then you also get Surrender to Madness, right? So you theoretically have an extra cooldown now, is how we're assuming it works, so we'll see. Okay, and then the big question mark here is they've redesigned Legacy of the Void. In their post, they kind of talked about the design goal here, that it's meant to kind of echo what Void Form used to be in its current state in BFA or before. So it says Void Form no longer has a duration. I don't really know if that means like you just are in Void Form and like you don't drain insanity, but now you get access to Void Bolt or whatever. But I don't know. I have no idea how that would work with things like Devouring Plague that actually spend insanity. Like we still don't quite have the full picture yet. It also increases damage done by 5%, so now we get 20 plus 5. So big increase. So yeah, that's our talent tree, guys. It's a doozy. I mean, we've been complaining about the lack of choices in the talent tree for a while and kind of not being interesting. I think they've, more or less, this is a great starting point. I think they've done awesome work here. I'm super excited to try stuff out. I'm sure there'll be some kind of weirdness or maybe balancing's off or tuning's off, but I think there's good potential here for something exciting, which I'm pumped about. Okay, that's the talents that we have to work with. All right, guys. So before I end the video, just a couple things that we don't know yet, or that's kind of weird. How does single target feel? Is it boring? We don't have Void Form anymore. Baseline. So, or we don't have the same kind of going in and out of Void Form all the time. So, what are we spending all of our time doing? It's probably going to be something around that new passive that is proccing this instant cast Mind Blast. So is that fun to play with? I mean, we'll see. I'm not sure. The other big thing is Power Infusion is still a thing. Like nothing's changed there, but Power Infusion's cooldown is desynced with Void Form. So You know, do we just save Power Infusion to always use it with Voidform, or the other way around, right? So like, how does that work? Does that make sense? Is that fun? It's still kind of weird to me. I don't really know why the two exist. And, you know, kind of lastly, you know, how does Legacy of the Void work with everything? The interactions are kind of weird, and they weren't super descriptive here, so we'll see what happens. Okay, and then finally, guys, before I end the video, I just want to say, you know, thanks to the community for providing feedback. I think this would not have happened if we weren't as vigilant in posting and doing all this kind of things and sharing things that I've posted, others have posted. So thank you so much for that. And, you know, look forward to more videos coming soon once we actually get our hands on this in the beta. They did just announce that they're going to be doing a character wipe, so it might take a bit to actually get ramped up with all of our Covenant abilities, legendaries, all that stuff to actually see how it plays out in full. But that's what we have for now, guys. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.